New Thinking Aloud is a non-profit endeavor. Your contributions to the New Thinking Aloud Foundation make a meaningful difference in our ability to produce new videos. You can now download a free PDF copy or purchase a beautiful printed edition of Issue 5 of the New Thinking Aloud magazine.
Thinking Aloud. Conversations on the leading edge of knowledge and discovery with psychologist Jeffrey Mishlove.
Hello and welcome. I'm Emmy Vadnais, co-host with Jeffrey Mishlove. Our topic today is Coma as a Window into the Unconscious, with my guest Alan Pearce, who is a journalist, broadcaster, and former BBC correspondent. He is co-author with Beverly Pearce of Coma and Near-Death Experience, the Beautiful, Disturbing, and Dangerous World of the Unconscious. He is author of several books, including Deep Search, How to Explore the Internet More Effectively, Make Your Smartphone 007 Smart, Deep Web for Journalists, Comms Counter-Surveillance Search, the Digital Journalist Handbook, and Deep Web Secrecy and Security. If you enjoy this program, please like, subscribe, press the bell icon, and share. Alan is located in Aquitaine, France. Now I'll switch over to the internet video. Welcome, Alan. It's a pleasure to have you with me on New Thinking Aloud today.
Thank you so much, Emmy. It's a joy to be here.
Most people think of a coma as a restful place or experience for people with serious medical conditions and critical care, yet you and your wife, your co-author, Beverly Pearce, found that couldn't be further from the truth in many cases.
No. Doctors call it sleeping. They call coma sleeping. It comes from the old Greek word, meaning deep sleep. And everyone's kind of got stuck in that mode. So they think people are sleeping. But what people are doing, if you look at the brain of a person in a coma, which is an extremely rare thing, you'll see that they're flatlining on an EEG brain scanner that's nothing at all in the deepest states of coma happening in their brain. And yet their mind can be incredibly active. And this can range from all sorts of things. The events within the intensive care unit can weave themselves into their reality, often becoming nightmare-like. You get other examples where people having a near-death experience, all the beautiful things that one expects with a near-death experience. And then additionally, some people within coma are experiencing alternate lives, and in some cases spanning decades, lives that are rich in every detail, in that, you hold down jobs, you go on vacation, you get married, you have kids, you worry about what you're going to have for dinner tonight, that level of existence. And maybe you're spending 20 plus years in that world, and yet within your coma, within this world, maybe you're only out for 2 weeks. And when people come out of a coma, initially, if they've had a ventilator, they're not generally able to speak for a couple of weeks or so. But when they come out of a coma, they often don't know who they are or where they are. I've had one person tell me she didn't even recognize humans when she came out of her coma. So you may come out of a coma and you've had an alternate life spanning decades, and there's all these people in the room who are super happy to see you, and you don't know who they are. And they're calling you by one name, and it's not the name you know yourself by. And you can't join in the conversation to say, hey, you're in the wrong room. And it will take an awful long time before you can get your voice back and start talking to people. By that time, you've had to come to terms with reality. If you've been in a coma for a while, you've got shocking muscle wastage, all sorts of physical problems, and there's shocking problems with your memory as a result, usually. So when you come out of a coma like this, people just don't know what to say. How can you explain to somebody that, okay, you are my wife or husband, but I've just come from an existence where I had another wife or husband and a different set of children, And no one will ever take you seriously.
To be fair, there are instances where you have investigated that a coma is necessary. However, you're suggesting, you and your wife, that most people don't need to be sedated as deeply as they typically are around the world.
Yeah, it's not actually us suggesting this. It's the medical literature that we've based the book around. It is a fact that almost every doctor and nurse working in an intensive care unit, not all, believe that a patient cannot tolerate being conscious on a mechanical ventilator, which is one reason they will put people into a coma. Another reason they put people into a coma is that since COVID, so many hospitals are cash-strapped, they're short on staff, and it seems expedient to place people into an unconscious state, and then all you've got to do is turn them every 2 hours, change the water, change the drips, etc. You haven't got to worry about, their problems, whatever's going on in their life that they might want to talk about. You haven't got to deal with families, all the rest of it. And this has become now standard practice. And it goes like this, that modern critical care has become a conveyor belt of care, where no one's actually looking over their shoulder at the product coming off the other end because they're just too busy. They do not see the damage that they're causing. No one ever seems to follow up a patient from intensive care, not the people within intensive care. And as they move further down the line, they're moving away from the people that really need to know most. When they get to talk to other doctors, they simply say things like, well, if you remember an event such as an alternate life spanning decades, it is only a false memory, or it is an hallucination, or it is intensive care delirium. Now, none of this makes sense because, first of all, you can't be delirious and unconscious. You can't hallucinate whilst you're unconscious. Invariably, you need your eyes open. To say it's a false memory just makes no sense. They say it's the brain's way of making up for the missing time that you spent in hospital. But without any reference points, the mind doesn't know how long you've been there. Maybe 10 minutes, maybe 10 days. So when you open your eyes in hospital, you'll see that you are in a hospital, that you will assume, presumably, you've had some form of mishap. Why would your brain then make up a story spanning 2 decades where you have a completely different wife and children? That makes no sense, but that is the official explanation. Why they do this is because they do not understand our current level of consciousness, the one we're experiencing right now. When they place people into the very depths of coma, they're going down to the deepest levels of consciousness, way deeper than people would ordinarily go. And as a consequence, they're experiencing things that the doctors and the nurses and the scientists cannot explain, because they can't explain this level of consciousness. They cannot begin to explain why somebody will have an alternate life spanning decades within a coma. They can only say it is a form of mental illness, as in you hallucinated or you had a false memory. And what they will do, if you're lucky enough, lucky is a term I'm not even sure I should use, if you get to see doctors down the line, they will simply say you have post-traumatic stress disorder, because that's a key one that people get after really appalling coma events. They will say that, if you've got memory problems, that these are just temporary, that this will pass, it will get better. And you just move down the line. And there's absolutely no support for people whatsoever.
You also discover that in addition to sometimes beautiful and sometimes disturbing and horrific experiences, that people actually can have worse cognition after a coma. They can have more death more frequently. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's been shown. See, what's happened since COVID, that they placed so many people into medically induced comas around the world that because of the sheer scale of it, they were able to see the damage more clearly. This has always been going on, certainly for the last 50 years. And there has been damage. Mostly it's not noticed. But because of COVID, because of the sheer scale, people have begun to notice that they are causing harm within coma. If you think that you're going in for an operation, and let's say it's a coronary heart bypass, which is a very, very common operation in the Western world, you would be on the operating table for 4 to 6 hours. You would be deeply anaesthetized in that time. The drugs that they give you on the operating table are more or less the same drugs that they will give you inside a coma, depending on availability. So for those 4 to 6 hours, you are, in effect, in a coma. They can see that something like 80 to 90% that undergo these operations suffer one form or another of cognitive harm. Face recognition goes, names go, huge gaps in their memory, and so on and so forth. Now, doctors really would rather not talk about this, because when people come out of a coma, they've had so much physical and mental damage just by being immobile for so long and having their brain shut down, that all sorts of problems happen, but these are hospital-acquired conditions. They're not generally covered by insurance, so hospitals just don't want to talk about them. Because of COVID, we've now seen there's been a lot of research into what happens to people within coma. It's shown that it has very high mortality, both within the intensive care unit and up to 6 weeks after discharge. Obviously, they don't want to put their hands up and say, we're responsible for this, because they're doing everything they're doing with the best will in the world. They don't wish to harm any patient. They're doing what they think is the right thing for the patient, but simply because they're not following patients up. And they won't take seriously the events that people recount within coma. They're left on their own. They're just dismissed. And they're left in the most terrible situation as a consequence of this. Many a time, a person, particularly if you had an alternate life or you've been trapped in some nightmarish existence, you really, really think you've gone mad. And when you try and explain these things to somebody, at the very best, they're going to say something like, well, dear, until recently, you were drugged up to the eyeballs and beyond. What do you expect? But there are no drugs, no cocktail of drugs that we know of, that will give a person an alternate life spanning decades, or just 2 weeks passes in this world. So just for starters, they haven't got a clue what's happening to patients. Patients are left on their own. And the overall effect, given the scale of this, I mean, it has affected over the past 50 years, millions upon millions of people. And if it isn't brought to a halt soon, we can expect millions of more people either to die within coma or soon after, or to have their lives ruined because they're shadows of their former selves.
Right. You describe in your book how some people have had beautiful experiences, as though they maybe even visited what some might consider the afterlife. You describe how some people have had horrific experiences, and how when they come back, some people actually say that it was the worst experience or experiences they've ever had, and then others who wish they could return there. And you also share a story of a woman named Isabel. I was wondering if you could give us some details of her experience.
Yeah, Isabel. Isabel is a medical professional working at one of the top hospitals in Cape Town in South Africa. Her job, in fact, is to book the anaesthetist and the doctors and to arrange deep sedation for patients. She contracted COVID, and eventually, because she was also developing sepsis, her colleagues said, yes, we're going to have to place you into a coma. At this stage in her life, she believed this is the best possible thing that can happen to me, and she said, yes, I'm ready, put me down. Inside her coma, oh dear, so many terrible things happened to Isabel. She had a range of alternate lives, and she was listing them one after another, after another, after another. All of them ended in murder, or rape, and at every one of these instances, she was paralyzed. In one life, she'd been kidnapped by a woman who wanted her husband, and she could describe the costume that they were wearing. It was very much a Victorian era, with a high collar and a cameo brooch at the neck. And another time, she was fighting apartheid in South Africa and gets murdered on a railway track. She finds herself in a organ harvesting facility. She said she was there for 4 years and kept in a coffin. And she could keep count of the various procedures that were being carried out on her. For example, she had a uterus removed 7 times. She also explained what it was like in the earlier stages of her coma, before she was really, really deeply down. And the nurses will perform certain procedures on you, such as a bed bath or cleaning your teeth. Now, Isabel described having her teeth cleaned. She thought she was being held by the kidnapper with the brooch, and that this kidnapper had melted a toothbrush and put razor blades in the place of brushes, and they were slicing into her teeth. Now, no nurse doing what she believes to be a kindness for the patient would have the first clue that it's being transformed in the patient's mind into a hideous form of torture. The same happens with bed baths. The people report that they've been raped, they've been sexually assaulted, and this adds up to a full-on PTSD for so many people. And when they come out of it, they've got all the classic PTSD symptoms: terrible flashbacks, fear that at any given moment they're just going to lose control so they don't go out. If they've had horrendous nightmares like Isabel had, they oftentimes don't want to go to sleep, because when they do, their dreams are far more vivid, really lucid dreaming. And they find themselves back into the very depths of hell. Isabel moved on within her coma, and she reached a point where she'd been in an organ harvesting facility and had all these different lives, and she was just becoming exhausted from the whole thing, and she wished to die. And she said she found herself in a field of tall grass, beautiful green grass blowing in the wind. There was a horse nearby, and then she started walking. It was a beautiful summer's day. There's a lake with trees hanging over the lake, and then she finds a wooden gnarled staircase running up into the sky. And she knows that at the bottom is life, and at the top is death. And she told me that she suffered so much within a coma that she wanted to die. And she climbed those steps up into heaven. She got 4 steps from the top, and she heard her voice being called, "Isabel, Isabel, you have to come back." She was so pissed off, she said, that she stomped back down those stairs, and eventually she made her way back to this world. When eventually she came out of her coma and took a reward to recover because she was on a ventilator, she went back to see her colleagues at intensive care in South Africa and tried to tell them about the events within coma. And they were like, "Oh yeah, that's weird. Oh really?" Like they really couldn't take her seriously. And this has been her problem. And if anyone should listen to anyone, it should be one medical professional listening to another. But that clearly illustrates that they are not listening. And poor Isabel found herself on her own, thinking she'd gone full on mad. She's a very smart cookie, so she began to investigate what had happened to her. And she looked online, and she found other people that were having very similar events within coma, and was able to share her account with them and them with her. And suddenly she just didn't feel alone. And this is one of the aims of our book, is that there are an awful lot of people who have survived coma. They have experienced events within coma. They've come out the other end, and they are shadows of their former selves. And they think it's just them. Everyone's telling them how lucky they are. They've had the best medical procedures possible. And anything that's wrong with them now, well, snap out of it. You've just got to get yourself better. But oftentimes they can't, and they're just trapped. They're on their own. And poor Isabel, lucky her, managed to find other coma survivors to talk with. But for so many, that they really are just trapped on their own, thinking they've gone mad.
Didn't Isabel live 100,000 years?
Yeah, exactly. Isabel had many, many, many things happen to her within her coma. Really detailed. When I say they happen, it's not like a dream. This is all in clear consciousness. And people will even say, rather like a near-death experience, that it was more real than reality. Isabel spent 10,000 years on the bottom and top levels of existence. At the bottom, it's all marred and funny creatures, and at the top, it's all noughts and ones. And she flits between the two, going backwards and forwards between these two levels of existence for 10,000 years. I can't even tell you how long ago anything was. I can't measure these things. But so often people within coma will give you, will count things. Somebody else within a coma gave birth to a child through rape 3 times. And that she can remember all of those details, just like they were happening in this world. Now, if a doctor says, if you're lucky enough to talk to a doctor, again, I'm cautious about how I say that. They will tell you that what you've experienced is just not real. However, even if it were a false memory, which it is not, why can't they take the false memory seriously? Because these people are suffering serious mental harm as a consequence of what they've experienced. But because the doctors can't explain what's happening to them, they're just dismissed.
How much did you find were people having pleasant experiences versus unpleasant to disturbing experiences in their coma?
Well, it's very hard to get a grip on this because really you'd need to talk to a few thousand to get a grip. When I look on forums on, say, Facebook, the Coma Survivors group on Facebook, more often than not, people are referring to nightmares or nightmarish events. They call them coma dreams. You can't dream in a coma because your brain's switched off. But the majority are talking of horrendous detail rather than the beautiful near-death experiences, which many do have. Some have both. And some are just completely trapped in a nightmarish world. Oftentimes, people find themselves in a loop that, it's almost as if the worst thing that could ever have happened to them is repeated over and over and over again without pause. And it's not as if they're viewing this remotely like a movie. They find themselves actually there in the room. So James, for example, who helped us with the book, he found himself watching his wife, not his wife in this world, he's not married, his wife dying in childbirth over and over and over again. And this is unbelievably horrific for somebody. So even if you think it's a false memory, you can help them deal with it, but it's not a false memory. What happens oftentimes, if they try and bring somebody out of a coma and they're in this nightmarish world, they will come out kicking and screaming. They will come out biting. They rip the tubes from their body, blood coming out, all the rest of it. And the doctors and nurses are really alarmed by this. This is so regular. And there's only one thing they can do, and that's turn up the medication again and put them back down. Unbeknownst to them, they're sending them back to this horror world where maybe they're watching their wife die over and over again in childbirth. And then when they try and bring them out again, maybe they're having another attack and they're desperate to cling on. This lovely Italian woman who told us her account, Chiara, she said that when she came out of her coma, she was so desperate to cling on to anything of this world that she was ripping all the tubes out. There was blood pouring everywhere. And she described this as sweet because here she was in this world again. But for so many, they just pushed them back down. And then what happens is no nurse really wants to bring somebody out of a coma if they're going to be kicking and thrashing. So they pass it on from shift to shift. That means the person in the coma is staying much longer than intended, and the problems that they accrue within their coma just get worse. Other times, you try and bring somebody out of a coma, they've been pumped with so much medication, and their kidneys have been switched off because the brain doesn't go through the circadian rhythms. The kidneys do not have their 24-hour cycle. They cannot remove toxins from the body. So these drugs stay within the system. And so instead of being fighting and tearing and biting when you come out, they turn off the medication and the person's still down there. And that person can stay there for a very long time before they do come to. So it can affect people in completely different ways. Also, too, they just don't know how much medication to give a person. There's no one-size-fits-all coma tablet. Two people of the same weight, same age, with the same illness, given the same medication in the same hospital, will very likely have two very, very different experiences. A person that, say, who's got a weight issue, who's, say, a recreational drug user, will be extremely hard to knock out, whereas, let's say, a little old lady with dementia would be extremely easy to knock out. And it's not as if they can put something like a thermometer into the person and read it on a scale. They just more or less, and this seems ridiculous, more or less they kind of guess how deeply down they are. There's a thing called the RAS score, Richmond Agitation Sedation Scale. And what they do is they just put electric charge to your face and see if it twitches or not. If it doesn't twitch, you're deeply down. If it twitches, give them a bit more. That is how scientific this is. So they have no idea what level of drugs to give patients. They don't even understand how the drugs work. Now, this seems remarkable, but it's true to say that no doctor or scientist understands how Prozac works or Viagra. No one knows. No one knows how LSD works. It just works. No one can pin that down. So they're giving people things they don't even know how they work. They're not even paying attention to the effects that is happening. And all the medical literature, certainly since COVID, strongly says do not place people into medically induced comas for a lengthy period of time, outside of a handful of instances. These are somebody's having a brain seizure, for example, and you're trying to prevent damage to the brain, so you will switch them off. That's generally agreed. But when you do so, it's for minutes at a time. It's not for days, weeks, or months. Certain types of injuries, such as abdominal wounds, where they don't want the patient moving around, they will put them in a coma. But again, not for months at a time. And after complications, certain complications following heart surgery, when they need to divert the oxygen, because the brain uses a lot of oxygen, when they want to divert that to the heart, so they switch the brain off. Again, it's not for a lengthy period of time. And whenever they do it, it's a trade-off, because it is proven, even if you're just having anesthetic in surgery for 4 to 6 hours, that there will be cognitive harm. So if you've been in a coma for weeks or months at a time, there is most certainly cognitive harm. But as I said, it's a hospital-acquired condition, and they would rather not talk about it, and they want to shunt you down the line and move in the next patient.
The drugs that these people receive are very strong, and as you indicated, they seemingly shut down the brain. However, there's more consciousness research coming out showing that when the brain seems to be, quote, shut down, that people can have deep inner experiences, such as with psychedelics, for example.
Precisely. When they've connected people up to an EEG brain scanner or an MRI scanner, and they've been on something like psilocybin, which is magic mushrooms, or they're taking DMT, which I won't try and pronounce, rather than the brain lighting up like a Christmas tree, key areas of the brain quieten right down. One main area that quietens down is the default mode network. This regulates our conscious reality. Now, when that switches off, it allows an expansion of consciousness. This has been shown. It's been shown in various trials with DMT, in scientific studies and whatever. It's also been shown that when you place a person into a coma, that the default mode network shuts down. Therefore, they've no filter anymore, and their consciousness is expanded. So when people report all manner of things within coma, such as the near-death experience, such as the nightmares, these very much echo the experiences that people have when they take, for example, DMT. If they take it in the form of ayahuasca, the Amazonian mystic brew, very much they will see a real horror show within that, but they are prepped for it. They're ready for this. And whereas a person in a coma is not prepped for it, and it comes as an utter shock. Now, why should there be a similarity between ayahuasca and coma? The human body, in fact possibly all mammals, produce a psychedelic compound, DMT. They don't know where in the body we produce it, lots of theories. They don't know why we produce it, but they can find it in the system when they look for it. People suffering from schizophrenia tend to have high concentrations of DMT in their urine. You can't carry out you can't test certain things on people just for ethics. So you can't push a human being to the extremes and wait to see if the DMT is increased. So they use animal models, rats, for example. And when they induce heart attacks in rats, they see the DMT in the system has gone up something like 600%. Now, proportionally, if a human being took that much extra DMT, they would be, away with the shamans. They'd be having a full-on ayahuasca journey. And that's what's happening to people within coma, because somehow these chemicals are being released. And it's believed, it can't be proven, it's believed that DMT plays a key part in the near-death experience, when people are nearing death or people perceiving death, that somehow, why this would happen, why God or nature would give us something so marvelous. Is it to help ease our passing, or is it to open a doorway to what lies next? And this we can't answer for sure, not until we cross over that doorway. But for sure, DMT is being produced in the body. And also, you're switching off the default mode network, two of the key things that people experience on psychedelics. Additionally, Buddhist monks, for example, in transcendental meditation, you put them on an EEG brain scanner and their brains are flatlining. There's no evidence that they're experiencing a rich inner life. So we can see it under certain controlled circumstances. When a person's in a coma, unless they've had a brain injury and they want to monitor the brain, no one's looking. They're just not. They're not connecting them up and seeing what's happening. One doctor we know that did do this, Dr. Wes Ely, professor of medicine at Vanderbilt, who helped us with the book substantially, he was becoming concerned that some of his patients coming out of coma were just not right, and he really needed to know. So he started to put them in MRI scanners and see what damage had been caused. He had one young lady, I think she was about 35. She was a mathematical whiz. When she came to see Dr. Ely after coming out of the coma sometime later, she couldn't even add up her checking account. She just felt unbelievably stupid. Dr. West had an IQ test taken on her. Before the coma, she had an IQ of 140, a genius level. After the coma, she had an IQ of 100, which is pretty dim. When they put it in an MRI scanner, instead of the brain of a 35-year-old healthy woman, they found the brain of a very, very old woman with dementia, and key parts of the brain had shriveled. They shriveled through lack of use, effectively, by being in the coma. And yet no one's looking, and it's only extremely rare, in the case of Dr. Wes Ely, that he was becoming concerned, fearing he was harming his patients, and wanted to take a deeper look.
Whereas others don't have the luxury for this.
They've got to move on to the next patient, and that's it.
It's easy to listen to what you're sharing and think, oh, these people are just essentially on drugs and just having their own psychedelic experiences. However, it does seem that they opened to much more in several of the cases you describe in your book. For example, there is a woman who I believe went into a coma, did not know she was pregnant. They had to medically abort the child. And then I believe she went on to have dreams of another child. Are you able to share that story?
Yeah, this is Nikki. Nikki's a really lovely mumsy person, and she's from Scotland. She already had one small child. Got pneumonia, turned to sepsis. Hospital said she's not likely to survive the night, and said to her husband, "I'm sorry, but we're going to have to put her into a medically induced coma. We don't think she will survive, however." And then, "Oh, by the way, we've discovered your wife was pregnant. Did you know?" He says, "No, we had no idea. Neither of us had any idea she was pregnant." They put her into a medically induced coma. Oftentimes, people within a coma, or people relating events within coma, will say that they woke up within their coma, as in, like, we might fall asleep on the sofa and just wake up and be back into this level of reality. Nikki wakes up and finds herself on a train, a small train carriage in India, and within this carriage, there's everything she needs for a newborn baby, bearing in mind she didn't know she was even pregnant. She doesn't know what the heck's going on. She can hear other people within the train, people moving up and down the corridor. She can hear other women groaning in labour elsewhere in the train. She's overwhelmed by the heat, the smells, all the rest of it. She describes the room in total detail. And then she realises that she is pregnant and that she is in labour. And she's got all over pain. She described it as different from her previous birth. She looks down. She's given birth to a beautiful baby boy. She cleans him up. She swaddles him, puts a old-fashioned nappy on, which she didn't have the first clue how to do, puts him in a little cot that's in this room, in this carriage, and she goes back to sleep. She wakes up later, and the baby's messed itself, and she has to change the nappy again. And she doesn't know what to do. But when she looks at the baby and looks into the baby's eyes, the baby has the clearest, sharpest ice blue eyes. She says it was a blue of a colour she had never seen before. Within her coma, things move on. She's with the child for a while. She eventually finds herself back in Scotland, in a hospital in Scotland. She's got the baby with her, who incidentally is called Mason. And all the nurses in the hospital just can't stop coming by to look at his beautiful, gorgeous blue eyes. They say they burn into your soul. She comes out of the coma. She's in a terrible, terrible state. She's been down for a very long time. She cannot speak because she's had ventilator damage. And when she starts to gain her faculties, she wants to know where her baby is. Where's baby Mason? So she's rocking in her arms, baby, and mimicking, where's my baby? So they kept showing her photographs of her existing baby. And she's going, no, no, no. But she can't speak. And she just gets angrier and angrier. And they don't know what to do. Long story short, eventually she's released from hospital. She's told she will never be able to carry a child again. But she does. And sometime later, she gives birth. And when she gives birth in a Scottish hospital and the nurse picks up the baby, what's the first thing the nurse says? She says, "Oh my God, what beautiful eyes. I've never seen a blue that colour before. They burn into your soul." She had effectively given birth to the same child twice, once within her coma and after her coma, and yet she had no idea she was even pregnant. I mean, how do you explain that? And she's extremely lucky that her husband was very understanding, and that their marriage survived this, where so many might not. And it took her a long time to get because she was in hospital for so long, to get her young boy, the existing boy, to recognize her again, to rebuild her relationship with her husband. But over time, just because he was caring and he understood and he took what she had seriously, she could cope with it. And other people would just be rejected. How can you say you gave birth in a coma? That's just mad. And people would just totally dismiss it. She was told by friends and family that she couldn't have been in a proper coma because she didn't remember visitors holding her hand and saying, how are you? We love you, etc., etc. Well, not everyone does that. Some people experience that, particularly those who are paralyzed but can't blink or move or make any noise or really anything. They can experience that. But Nikki was somewhere else, completely somewhere else. And no one can explain that to her. She was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder, and that was left at that. Goodbye.
And just to be clear, she didn't go to term with a pregnancy while she was in coma.
No, it was very early on. It was very, very early on.
She lost that baby, and then she was pregnant after she came out of her coma and was better.
She became pregnant again, yes,
yeah.
after time, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I mean, she's not the only person to tell me she gave birth.
So Nikki had a precognitive experience about her child with the blue eyes.
You could say that, because also, I mean, why blue eyes? When you look at Nikki and her husband, and she showed me pictures of her family, they've all got brown eyes, so dark in point of fact that they look black. And when you see the new boy, it's as if somebody's poked his eyes out in the photograph and they're shining a light from behind. They're just staring out at you. I mean, it's just like, how can that be? No one in her family has blue eyes. Often babies are born with blue eyes and they change. This boy has continued to have the most striking ice blue eyes of a blue you've never seen before. I mean, that is strange, isn't it?
Yeah. So these people are able to expand their consciousness in ways that we are still understanding.
We just don't get it. We just simply don't get it. And these are, to the people undergoing it, Nikki, to all intents and purposes, lost a child. As in, she woke up, there is no child. And she grieved for years over that. People that have come out of comas and they've had an alternate life with another family, they just grieve for years. They don't get better necessarily. And oftentimes they don't remember fully their life before the coma. What they remember is what they've been told subsequently, and that fills in the blanks. They've got a greater memory of events within coma than they have from this world. And convincing, how do you convince yourself that you are now in the real world where everything doesn't seem as clear as it did before? People that claiming to be your partner or whatever, and even if you do recognize them, they don't feel the same anymore. People have likened it to the movie Invasion of the Body Snatchers, where someone else has taken over their body and they're not the same kind, caring people that they were before. This crops up a lot. And and they're just left. They're just left with this and no one to talk to. I was going to mention, Deborah, who in her coma, the hospital reality will weave itself oftentimes within your other level of consciousness as you're going down. And the kind, caring doctors and nurses turn into sadistic monsters. And one of them leant forward to Deborah and said, do you want a job? Do you want to earn your keep, seeing you're just lying there doing nothing? I'm opening a bar. I'm opening a serial killer themed bar, and I need people to lie still. Next thing Deborah knows, she's in a nightclub with a paying audience, and nightly people are reenacting terrible, terrible crimes on her, Jack the Ripper type crimes and things of this order. And they're using actors to do this. Over time, it becomes so successful that they start employing people released from prison, sex offenders, rapists, killers, whatever. And they're carrying out their crimes on Deborah nightly, and she's experiencing this. She fell pregnant 3 times within her coma. 3 times she gave birth, and 3 times those children were taken away from her. So, as well as just being like a prisoner trapped in this bar, and she was actually in this bar for 80 years. Another example of someone who can give you an actual time. And she knows it was 80 years because when it was closing, they said, we've had a good run. We've been running for 80 years, different management. We've got to close. And they didn't know what to do with her. So they sold her to an organ harvesting facility, took her there in a wheelchair, and they put her in a tank where she watched her body dissolve. And you come out of that, and there's nothing positive. It's not like having a lovely near-death experience where you've never felt happier, you stood on the threshold of this life and the next. There's vital lessons to be learnt from all of this. There's no lessons, seemingly, to be learnt from these horrific events. The Nikki with the baby with the blue eyes, there's nothing to learn from that, seemingly. And poor Deborah, and it's not as if her life was in any sense troubled. She was having a really nice life. She had a great job. She'd married 3 years to Adam. Happy as she can be. And yet she has the most horrendous events within her coma. And so they all look like they're peaceful, invariably. Sometimes they're crying. But invariably they look peaceful. And this is how doctors and nurses think the patient's experience is, that it's a peaceful experience, that they've been spared the trauma of this busy intensive care unit. And that they're better off. In fact, if you ask most doctors or nurses, if they had to be in their own intensive care unit, they would say, yeah, knock me out. I don't want to remember any of it. And they say that because they don't know.
Have you come across any people who were in a coma that essentially are what a lot of the medical profession think may be happening, that they're just calm and peaceful and don't really have many memories at all?
Yeah, okay. We had 20 plus people helping us specifically with the book, Coma Survivors. 2 of them had blanks within their coma, as in nothing happened within their coma. Darren had terrible COVID. They told him to say goodbye to his family and put him down, and he just panicked on the way down. He just, don't knock me out. I'm not going to come out of this. Don't knock me out. And they just did. They knocked him out. When he came out of that, he had no memory of events within coma. And he was a really fit guy, gym fit before all this. And since, he's taken this as an opportunity to give something back to the system. So he's gained a lot from this. He donates blood plasma for some reason. As a COVID survivor, is highly useful. And he's donated more blood plasma than any other human being in Britain, for example. And he runs marathons. So he's in an incredible situation. Then there's my friend, also called Nikki, and her heart stopped for 40 minutes. And she was rushed to hospital, and they told her family she's not going to survive. They put her into a coma, and when she came to, it was a complete blank. But the events after the coma became other realities. She's conscious, but she's sitting up in bed, firmly believing that she is the Pope, His Holiness, the Pope, and that everyone around her is just waiting on her every word, and she makes us feel very important. And she also believed that she went to the Oscars. And when I asked her, did you sit in the front row or anything? Did you have a table? And she said, no, I was in the back seats, and she could describe the gown that she was wearing and all these details. But that wasn't in a coma, that was post-coma. And that tends to be called ICU delirium, which they don't understand at all, which is remarkable because we can demonstrate very clearly in the book why people in intensive care prior to being in a coma have altered realities. They will see kangaroos in the room, they will see other people and all sorts of things. When you compare this to, let's say, for example, prisoners who are in solitary confinement, they can get a thing called the prisoner's cinema, where initially they get bright geometric patterns and all the rest of it. And then over time, they start seeing creatures, other people. They find themselves in other realities. And they know this is happening because there's no mental stimulus, there's no physical stimulus, and there's no visual stimulus. This is precisely what's happening to people within intensive care, and they're sharing the same symptoms, except when they're not in a solitary confinement, it's classified as ICU delirium. Well, it's very easy to prevent this because you just make sure those people are not starved of experience of one kind or another, that they're there as humans, interacting with other humans in the hospital, invested in their own recovery, able to get themselves better, and it most definitely the way to go. But most doctors and nurses just they think that intensive care in its own right is so scary that we knock them out to save them the trauma. But people are telling me that, okay, intensive care was not good, but I'd rather have that any day than the horrendous nightmares you sent me to in my coma.
It's fairly well known in the folks among New Thinking Aloud, parapsychologists, remote viewers, people who are lucid dreaming, wanting to develop their psychic intuitive gifts, that, and you mentioned earlier about the Buddhist meditators, that by decreasing sensory experiences can help open you up to greater consciousness, greater knowing. And it sounds like possibly in these coma experiences, people are given drugs to paralyze them. So in effect, they have sort of like a medically induced locked-in syndrome on top of already being sleep deprived. They're already incredibly sick and ill. Some of them have high fevers. And then they're given this cocktail of drugs. And one listening might think, well, of course, they're just basically having hallucinatory experiences.
Yeah, as I said before, you can't hallucinate whilst unconscious. You might dream or something, but you can't hallucinate. It's just a conscious state. They just don't get it. We think the drugs, people will say, well, it's the drugs. But the drugs just don't have this effect, not in any combination.
Or they're just accessing a deep part of their repressed subconscious.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, these are questions that we can't just automatically answer. Mm-hmm. Yeah, anything like that could be happening.
Or a combination thereof.
They could be tapping into the collective consciousness that Carl Jung talked of, for all we know. I definitely think, okay, here's what happens so often. When you look at many of the events within coma, we looked for parallels wherever we could find them. And one key parallel is that if you look at mystics and gurus and shaman and people of this type who, since the dawn of time, have taken themselves off to the deepest recesses of caves to cut themselves off from the physical world to commune with the spirit world. The things they report and the things they're seeking are the things people report within coma. They report beauty, as in near-death experiences. They report abject horror, as people also report within, say, ayahuasca. And you can just see what's happening because people within a coma are in the most extreme form of sensory deprivation. We spoke to people who've been partaking of the dark retreat. I had no idea what a dark retreat is. It is like putting yourself in the back of a cave, except you can book these things online. We spoke to a number of people that spent lengthy periods of time. The longest was 40 days in pitch darkness. And when she recounted events there, she recounted many events that were very similar to those within coma. We spoke to Emma, who runs a dark retreat in the Guatemalan highlands. And she's done about 10 dark retreats herself. And I showed her some of the experiences from coma survivors that we'd gathered. And she wasn't shocked at all. She said, I've had all of these. The nightmares, the alternate lives, which she sees as the past life, and the heavenly experience. We've had all of this. She said we've had 500 people pass through our retreat, and we interviewed them all afterwards. And all these things are common. So in some respects, you can see what's happening. Just the sheer sensory deprivation, cutting the mind off from all external sources, is making something happen. They can't say quite what's happening. Science will say it's the mind or brain's way of filling in gaps or so on. But, I mean, why would you be in solitary confinement and be treated to a fantastic light show like fireworks? It's very strange. But for sure it's happening. And when you can see it happening elsewhere and you can find the triggers for it elsewhere, and then you take that back to intensive care, you can quickly prevent things like ICU delirium just by keeping people busy, keeping them active, involving them, having their hair done, having someone coming in and doing Reiki on them, whatever, getting up and about, just walking a few paces. And this is another thing. Just the first time you get out of bed in hospital, if you've been sick and you manage to walk a few paces, this is a big aha moment. It shows you that you're on the road to recovery. People within a coma, when they're trapped in an organ harvesting facility, do not feel that they need to recover in any shape, manner, or form. And more often than not, they're wishing they were dead.
I actually worked in ICUs in the late 90s and early 2000s in a few different capacities as an occupational therapist and also as an integrative medicine practitioner. And I did actually provide energy healing to some of these folks. And I'm really glad that I did, because we did know at the time that, quote, ICU delirium was a real thing. And like you said, they didn't know if people were experiencing that or not. So they would sometimes request that we would come and provide those. So I would like to think that in some ways that helped people. Of course, I really don't know for sure. And you also mentioned that before COVID, that the walking and awake ICUs were becoming more popular. And then COVID happened. And then now it seems like, is it possible that these awake and walking ICUs are becoming more common again? Or maybe you're helping raise awareness about that.
Yeah, not yet. They're common. What happened, I think, with COVID was that so many hospitals were just overwhelmed. They didn't know what to do with people. They could compare it to similar ailments such as ARDS, acute respiratory distress syndrome, which is invariably fatal. And what they would do with them is try and make them as comfortable as possible, help them breathing because they need oxygenating, so they put them on the ventilator and they knock them out. They didn't know what to do with COVID, so they knocked everyone out. Prior to COVID, more and more, but you can't say many, doctors and nurses were waking up to the notion that they were harming patients with what they were doing. In some cases, it's kind of obvious. Lack of mobility is going to cause problems. Anyway, that was starting to happen, and they were starting to gather interest. And then with COVID, a lot of the experienced intensive care staff just burnt out and never went back to the job. They just couldn't do it. And also they had moral dilemmas, some of them, who did not want to knock the patient out, but being told by the hospital system, this is what you have to do. It's the only way we can cope with the sheer scale of this. And what happened then was an awful lot of people were drafted in from elsewhere in the hospital system, particularly for these intensive care units that they just knocked up, like aircraft hangars or whatever. And then other people moving into the regular intensive care units coming from pediatrics didn't have the knowledge, hadn't seen the damage that was being caused, were being told by the hospital administrators that you've got to knock them out. And that's what they did. And now, because hospitals are cash-strapped and there's a staff shortage globally within hospitals, they've stayed with this, thinking it's the best thing to do. And one of the people that's helped me with the book enormously is a nurse practitioner, Kaylee Dayton. She's up in Washington State. And she was taken before a tribunal recently. And there was talk of taking her license away because she wasn't knocking people out and rendering them senseless for months and weeks at a time. That she was getting them up and about on a mechanical ventilator, exercising them, and that they were walking out of the intensive care unit, as opposed to most patients who've been in coma, who were taken out of the ICU on a gurney. And she got in trouble for this from people who didn't know what they were talking about, because there is no medical literature that advocates prolonged deep sedation outside of a handful of cases I mentioned earlier. And yet everyone does it. Since COVID, there's been a wealth of papers, because I said earlier, because of the scale, that we can now see much more clearly the damage. But the people working in intensive care are so busy, so worn out by the end of the day, they're not bringing themselves up to speed in the latest literature. And it's only people who are entering the profession now, and this is heartening, that apparently more people are training as doctors and nurses now post-COVID, certainly in the US, than they were before. A lot of people will want to go into intensive care. It's the, special forces, as it were, of the hospital system, where all the excitement is. As they come in, they will be reading the up-to-date literature, and they will see just how alarming what they've been doing in the past really is, and the damage that they're causing patients and also killing them. And we've certainly had doctors put their hands up and say, with the best will in the world, following standard medical procedure, I have harmed patients for sure, and I've very likely killed some. And a lot of people are really worried about that, but they just can't wake people up. And when they try to tell other doctors and nurses what they're doing, these doctors and nurses will say, yeah, but your patients aren't as sick as ours. Ours can't tolerate this. Ours can't tolerate being on a ventilator. And they just automatically assume you can't. But when, I've spoken to doctors and nurses who are placing people on ventilators, and then within minutes, they're bringing them round again. They've gently explained the procedure that they're going to carry out on them. When they come to, they've got a small amount of medication to take all the anxiety away. You've got a family member, hopefully, next to them, holding their hand, reassuring them. In the same way that we never stop to think about our breathing minute by minute, eventually that patient will cease to think about his breathing. But when he comes out of the coma, because he's got a great tube down his throat and that's seemingly breathing for him, it's a shock. Distract that person well enough, and sooner or later they won't think about their breathing. And modern ventilators, they're not like iron lungs that blasting air in and sucking it out. These are microprocessor controlled devices that enable the patient to initiate the breathing. So actually, apart from the fact you've got a tube down your throat, it's actually not that uncomfortable. And I've seen videos of people playing volleyball in intensive care while attached to mobile ventilators in Brazil. And I was just blown away by that. And they're doing two things at once there. They're engaging the patient mentally and physically. And as a result, that person, when they go back to bed, will feel genuinely tired, not just monged, knocked out by drugs, and will actually have proper sleep and very likely experience proper REM sleep, which is one thing that never happens to somebody within a coma because the circadian rhythms have been turned off. There's no REM sleep. 3 days without REM sleep can tip almost anybody over the edge. It's used universally as a torture. when it's been used as a torture, it's been proven in court that, say, 3 weeks of sleep deprivation in a prison situation leads to long-term cognitive harm or full-term damage, and that if it's done intentionally, it should be classified as torture. And yet doctors and nurses are doing it every day with the best will in the world to patients. And truly, this could happen to any one of us. This is not like some weird disease we read about online that's happening in the far part of the world that won't ever come here. Every one of us, if we live in the Western world, it's like to have 2 or 3 stays in an intensive care unit. Post-COVID, you're going to get a substandard level of care. And people really need to know that if a loved one's going in there and they want to put them in a coma, I'd say read the book first, because you can find out that you don't need to be put into a coma. I'm looking at forums all the time. And 2 days ago, someone wrote in and said that their father had a heart attack and they've put him into a coma. Now, there's nothing in the medical literature advocating that at all. In fact, it's known that you want to get them moving around. So it's just happening all the time. You've got to be so careful of this. And how you would argue if you had a loved one and the doctors who know best were insisting they were going to put that person into a coma, and you're the one kicking up a fuss, people are going to think you're the idiot, and they're going to make you shut up and woe-betide your loved one in that coma, because they will not be the same again. They will not.
Several of the people also described having near-death experiences. And did you find that they actually were corroborated with actual physiological events of them having their heart stopped, no more brain waves?
Well, no brain waves for starters. If you're actually in a coma and you were on an EEG brain scan, that there are no brain waves. There are none.
Okay.
I spoke to a number of people that said they had died in the clinical sense within a hospital and had been resuscitated. One guy told me he died 4 times. And he, in fact, had the most exquisitely beautiful near-death experience. He's a hospital chaplain in Birmingham, Alabama. His name is Corey Agricola. Wonderful guy. And he went to heaven in his coma. He's Christian, but he didn't see God. He didn't see Jesus. He just saw a mountain of light. And after he came out of his coma, he didn't have the physical problems that so many have. He didn't seem to have the memory problems that so many have. And this actually, having died and found himself standing at the pearly gates effectively, now, when he's in hospital working as a chaplain, and he's counselling families of the bereaved, he's talking to families who've got people in coma, he's talking of people who are near death, he can actually give them a first-hand account of the afterlife. And it has invigorated him in such a way. He was burning out. He works for the UAB hospital in Birmingham. It's vast, and he claims to have, over the years, counselled 15,000 patients. And he just was losing the plot, as it were. Now, he's completely invigorated. But that's very unusual. He's the only one in the book who's really come out of this in a serious positive sense. I mentioned Darren earlier, but Darren didn't actually have any events within coma. Those that have the beautiful experiences, the near-death experiences, have, I think all of them have said to me, who helped us with the book, have said to me that they now have no fear of death whatsoever. Okay, I don't want to go yet. Got things I want to do. But come that time, I'm no longer scared because I know where I'm going. When you talk to others who found themselves, say, in an organ harvesting facility or something equally appalling and had no nice experience, they don't want to die. Because they've been to hell and they think they're going to go back to hell. And they won't even go to sleep, as I was saying earlier, because their dreams are not so vivid. And they're so damaged, those people. So you get beautiful experiences which people can turn around and turn into very, very powerful life experiences. And then you get other events that you can't put them into any form of context. They just defy all belief. And when I say they defy all belief, no Hollywood scriptwriter could come up with stuff like this. It's just so ghastly. You know, the only way to do it would be to talk to other
coma survivors, because they're
so off the scale.
Yeah. And many of those coma experiencers you describe in your book and we've talked about here today, as you've shared, give really precise detail. Many of them feel like they've lived another life or they've lived many other lives. Some of them are happy to return and some of them are sad and still grieving that other life or experience.
Yeah, and how do you deal with either of those? You know, if somebody has, let's say, in the normal course of events, a near-death experience, and let's say it was the beautiful one, and let's say they decide to look online and see if they can find anybody else that's ever had such a thing, and then they find out there is a thing called the near-death experience, that they've experienced one, suddenly they don't feel they're on their own. There are a whole bunch of groups dealing with near-death experience, particularly on Facebook, with multiple thousands of people signed up. Coma, on the other hand, most people don't have any point of reference so they can think that somebody else has possibly experienced this. They think it's just down to them. And that's it. And if sometimes they are lucky enough to start looking up their symptoms, particularly the physical ailments that are very, very common, regardless of what placed you in the coma in the first place, they will often look those up and then find other people reporting those symptoms, and those people have been in coma. Rather alarmingly, these symptoms, which have now been recognized, by the way, as post-intensive care syndrome, PICS, oftentimes I'm finding it's being reclassified as long COVID. So when people come out of a coma and their memory is shot to ribbons, when they are fatigued beyond belief, the doctors are now saying, that's long COVID. Well, sorry about that, because we don't understand it. There's nothing we can do. But the reality is they've got PICS, invariably, post-intensive care syndrome, and that's a hospital-acquired condition. And as I said, they just don't want to talk about it.
You're doing a wonderful job raising awareness about this. Is there anything else you want to share today, Alan, about coma as a window into the unconscious or consciousness?
Yeah, I think we've just scratched the surface of something with this book, because people are very interested these days in consciousness, something no one understands. I think it would be really important that people who are trying to understand consciousness, particularly the curious levels that people repeatedly visit, such as with, say, DMT, two people taking DMT together can find themselves in the same environment. If you could debrief coma survivors, you might get an understanding of different levels of consciousness, possibly other levels of existence. And seemingly, people are tapping into past lives within coma. Some I've said are absolutely fine, just like a normal life. And others are just ghastly, one death after another. And this needs an awful lot more exploration. And I think we've just opened a door, as it were, to these other gateways. And it's now time for other people to take this further.
Alan, thank you so much for all that you've shared today. I did really enjoy reading your book, and I'm so grateful for all that you've done to advocate for these people that you and your wife, Beverly Pearce, have done. Thank you so much for being with me today.
Well, thank you so much. And the book is an easy read. It's not a scientific or medical book. It's a book written for a general audience. And I wouldn't say it's a fun read, but my God, we take the reader to some very strange places with this book. And it's also an audio book coming. So there we are. Thank you so much, Emmy.
My pleasure. And for those of you listening or watching, thank you for being with us. You are the reason that we are here.
Book 2 in the New Thinking Aloud Dialogues book series is a tribute to parapsychologist Russell Targ celebrating his 90th birthday.